We five left Dublin by air and flew out over Dublin city and docklands, with Holt Head away to our left. We flew to Cardiff in Wales and took a taxi to the Castle Hotel in Chepstow. As the name implies, the hotel is right opposite a large Norman castle, built in 1067 by William the Conqueror. We didn't venture into the castle, but we walked around the walls of this massive structure. I think it's still under construction. We explored Chepstow town, passing through the old town gate through the quiet, narrow streets. Chepstow is right on the Welsh-English border. Crossing the old iron bridge over the River Wye brought us into England. As we had the afternoon free, we decided to do the short stretch from Sedbury Cliffs to Chepstow. This was our first sight of and walk on the massive earthwork that is Offa's Dyke. In places, huge trees grow on the dyke, like this very old oak. We had the customary photo shoot at the start of Offa's Dyke. Someone's missing here. Oh, there he is. Magic. The starting point of Offa's Dyke is not very far from the elegant and busy Severn Road Bridge. Back to the Castle Hotel for refreshments. It was a nice, comfortable hotel with a linear garden at the back. For some reason, Eileen was banished to the annex. Next morning, we crossed the River Wye to start the Offa's Dyke path. We had our last glance back at Chepstow Castle. We climbed up above the Wye through woods, and we would follow the Wye on and off over the next number of days. Travelling through fields, we stopped briefly to get a last look at the Severn Bridge. The occupants of this house very kindly provided drinking water for both walkers and their dogs. Through a gap in the trees, we got a good view of the Cistercian Tintern Abbey. Just checking our route. To be fair, Offa's Dyke path is well marked. We dropped down from the woods and came to a horse sanctuary. This had a very nice coffee shop. We supported the shop and they were quite happy for us to eat our packed lunches there. We came back down to walk the banks of the Wye at Brockweir. was very peaceful here, and one of our party succumbed under a tree. We roused him and moved on. The very elegant Big Sweer Bridge. We climbed again, away from the river, and we were walking in and out of woods. We eventually arrived at Redbrook village, where we were collected and brought to our accommodation, the Florence Hotel. Some of us were in the main building and some were in the annex of this well-run family hotel. We were dropped back to Redbrook next morning and straight away began with the climb, and around us all the hills were covered with trees. We came to this white roundhouse at Kimmin. It had been an 18th century gentleman's dining club. Looking down beneath us was our next destination, Monmouth town. In the grounds of the roundhouse there's this monument celebrating naval victories of Nelson and others of that period. On the way down, we stopped to admire some fine brown pigs.
Nice pigs, clean pigs.
As we entered Monmouth, we crossed a very busy road into the town and explored some of its narrow streets. We passed Shard Hall Court with the statue of Charles Rolls of Rolls-Royce fame. We left the town through the Manor Bridge Gate, built in 1270. Down the centuries, this had been a toll, a guard room, a jail and a house. We were in rolling countryside now. We stopped for lunch in a flower-strewn meadow. Offa's Dyke path took us through an enormous orchard growing apples specifically for cider making. Then through a field of maize.
We're crossing this road here.
Just checking the map to make sure our route is correct. Then into a field of beet. We came to White Castle. Only one went in without paying. He claimed he didn't know there was a charge. Two beautiful horses. The spotted one, I believe, is an Appaloosa. We arrived at Glengattock, where we stayed in an old rectory beside the nice white church. Off again next morning, heading for Lantony on the edge of Black Mountains. The terrain was more mountainous now. We climbed up onto the Hatterall Ridge with fine views on the way. There were quite a few little groups of wild horses on the ridge. It was cold and windy on the top, with rain threatening. Once up, the walking was easy. We stopped for lunch on the ridge to grandstand views. We weren't walking the whole ridge today, but dropped down to Lantony. As we approached Lantony, we passed this massive ruin of Lantony's Augustinian Abbey, or Priory, built in 1103. Beside the abbey is this small church. It was open, so we went in. It started to rain heavily, so we sheltered a while in the church porch. There is a hotel in the abbey grounds, but there's nothing to signify that. A group of horse trekkers braving the rain. We were collected at Lantony and brought to stay in a working farm a few miles away, very comfortable and homely. Tom and I had a self-contained family apartment between us with all mod cons. Downstairs was this lovely lounge. Proud cock and his wives. This little piggy getting ready for market. The friendly farm cat. Off again next morning, leaving the Priory behind. With quite a stiff climb back up onto the Hatterall Ridge, it gave great views into the valley below. Another small group of wild horses. It was windy and cold again, with rain not far off. The rain came down very heavily as we walked the second half of the ridge. The way would have been very muddy, but thankfully parts were paved with slabs of rock. The rain eased as we descended to lower ground. Farmers were gathering up a very large flock of sheep. A soft rain persisted almost all the way to York House in Hay-on-Wye. York House is an unusual house in that it is two identical large houses back to back, originally built for a father and son. As we walked through Hay-on-Wye in the morning, we saw a number of interesting buildings in the town. The fine clock tower. We were back on the River Wye again, still quite a substantial river. We soon left the river and climbed to higher ground. We were starting to see signs of autumn, wind-blown crabapples and sour sloes. The way dropped down through fields to the tiny village of Newchurch. Passers-by the little church are invited to make tea or coffee using the facility, all left neatly to be used. We partook gratefully and rested for a while. We chatted to a group of English women also walking off Dyke. It was up into the misty hills again. It was a bit chilly and we'd hoped for warming drinks at the Royal Oak in Glastonbury, but alas, it was closed. Back up again with rain threatening. In long days past there had been a race course here, but little sign remains. High on the top of this ridge, we came to a group of monkey puzzle trees, completely out of place. This was a noted favourite place of Nan Farrar. We reached Kington town late afternoon. It was raining next morning as we left Kington heading for Knighton. The rain dripped from the trees and it was a bit dismal. Birdsong lifted our spirits. We travelled through high woods and farmland. We stopped for lunch outside the Baptist church in Dolly Green. Behind bars is the best place for these retrobates.
On with it.
Under a darkening sky, we continued on to Knighton. The morning in Knighton was bright and sunny. The information office in Knighton was closed as it was quite early. We walked along the bank of the Thames River and carefully crossed the Heart of Wales railway line. It was a bit of a grunter up into the hills, and today was to be the hardest day. We had to cross over 3 ridges of hills to reach Brompton Crossroads, our destination for the day. We climbed ever higher onto Penpunton Hill. It was steep up and down all the way, with little level walking. Lunch in the woods and off again. This is the exact halfway point of our journey, so we had to pose for photos. As I mentioned earlier, here and there on the Dyke is covered in large trees grown over many, many years. Autumn winds and fruits, and a large variety of mushrooms. We continued up and down, but made steady progress in the strong wind. We eventually reached Brompton Crossroads and our pickup. We stayed in the town of Montgomery overnight, and we were dropped back at the dilapidated Bluebell Inn at Brompton Crossroads. Our first puzzle of the day: were we right or were we wrong in our navigation? We sensibly ignored the sign. We crossed through fertile fields with the ruins of Montgomery Castle away to our left. This Norman castle was built on the site of an earlier structure in the 13th century. Every day we get deeper into autumn. We pass through a pheasant farm in the forest, with young birds scratching around in the forest floor. We stopped at the Beacon Ring archaeological site, but there's little to see. A large mound and a copse of beech trees. Downhill to Buttington Bridge, today's destination. This is a beautiful cast iron bridge, but not suitable for the heavy modern traffic it carries. The footpath is only 12 inches wide. We cross the River Severn and join the Severn Way. We walked along the towpath of the Montgomery Canal. Shortly after this rather delicate looking drawbridge, we reached our guest house for the night. I fell in love with Moore's farm. It was very comfortable and cosy for such a large house. It was a working farm. A nice homely lounge to relax in. We were given the complete run of the place, even encouraged to help ourselves to the complimentary drinks from the cabinet. Wouldn't happen in Ireland. Breakfast was at a large communal table with other guests, just like home, with candelabra and silverware. Lord John was last to leave table. It was time to pull ourselves away. This drawbridge was receiving maintenance. Another sunny morning as we walked the towpath and the Severn Way. Boys will be boys. After a few miles we left the canal and followed the winding Severn. We appeared to be on a more modern dyke.
Stay there.
Someone caught pinching wind-blown pears off the ground and implicated others. Shame. She didn't touch the plums. In the middle of nowhere was this coffee stop.
Can you get my ladybird in focus now?
Finian adopted a ladybird that okay, Finn? The Severn must occasionally flood here as we came to these water controlling gates in the modern Dyke. Contented bull in our path.
No, there's somebody who's got 6 children.
Oh.
And she's bought a dog each. One for the boys and one for the girls.
So what the red ones are on for moving on?
Yes, they're the ones that they've chosen, yes.
Leaving the cattle and dogs behind, we reached the Golden Lion pub, the village of 4 Crosses.
Jeez, don't encourage him, whatever you do.
With a little help from John Williams, Tom gave a lunchtime concert on a borrowed guitar. That's enough of that, thank you, Tom. We went through a very new and decorated underpass, but new signage had not been put up, causing some confusion. We got sorted and came once more to the Montgomery Canal.
Where'd you go that way? Is that there? Are you going that way?
It was particularly picturesque along by the canal. The canal crosses the river here on a long stone aqueduct. This stretch of canal is a photographer's paradise. We reached the Bradford Arms in the small town of Dyke. Today we headed for Salatin. We climbed steeply up to a large disused quarry. As we walked this level path, we had marvellous views across the valley and the Berwyn Mountains. We stopped for a while at a viewing point and watched a large buzzard below.
There's one down below us. Yeah. Getting the thermals. It's very early for them though.
On again. The route took us across the very edge of a golf course. We stopped at Trefonan village for lunch on the village green. Someone had cleverly carved an old tree. A project in progress doesn't go anywhere yet. Some just can't get away from the phone. Three lads in a Latin posing. Another old race course just before Salatin.
I am not.
Facing the wrong way.
That's his face.
We left Salatin on a misty morning, pursued by Highland cattle. We passed two enormous lime kilns and climbed onto another excellent ridge. Some handsome horses. We passed this beautiful row of cottages to birdsong. We climbed up again to Chirk Castle, taking the alternative permissive route. It was near here that the last Welsh Prince of Wales was defeated in battle by Henry II of England. There was a medieval pageant up at the castle, but we did not attend. We stayed at the stable blocks with its tourist shops and had refreshments. We said farewell to Chirk Castle and continued on. We joined the Glengothlin Canal. This is very much a tourist amenity. Many beautiful maintained barges moored along the banks. This one had seen better days. Here we came to Telford's Aqueduct, 120 feet long and built in 1808, a magnificent structure. This carries the canal over the River Dee. In the distance is a viaduct carrying the rail line to Wrexham. A memorial to the quarrymen. A more modern memorial to quarrymen near the canal harbour at Trevor. Being a Sunday, the canal was very busy. We had our lunch here and watched the activity. Some of these craft were very long and must take great skill to navigate. The viaduct we crossed earlier is so narrow only one craft at a time can cross, so there are hold-ups. We left Trevor by a side canal and headed for the hills again. It was a beautiful, bright, sunny day. We were coming into a great limestone area. Llangollen came into sight below. The castle, Bran, appeared perched on a huge limestone block. It was a very stiff climb up, all the more so as that was the end of the day, but it was well worth the effort. There's not much left of the castle, built in the 13th century. It must have been impressive. Views from the top, and Llangollen far below. After our climb, we had to have photos. We left Bran Castle and descended to Llangollen, not actually on the Offa Dyke path, but our accommodation was there. A rather interesting carved crow and goblin, don't know its significance. Llangollen is an interesting town with the Dee noisily flowing through. I was fascinated by the name over the shop. I wouldn't attempt to pronounce it. Beside the river is the Heritage Railway, which looked interesting, but it was too early to be open. The taxidermist took my interest. He had some lovely specimens in his display. We made our way back to the Offa Dyke path, back over the canal. An ominous sign. We didn't go there, although later signs pointed to the same place. We rejoined the way below Bran and passed through wonderful rugged country of screes and high cliffs. A haughty peacock was in our way. With some reluctance he moved. We walked carefully here on very narrow tracks. The absolute ruggedness of the place had a great appeal to me. Only the odd raven made any noise. Just below us was World's End. We passed by it and climbed to the heather moors for about a mile on a tarmac road. We turned off the road onto a narrow trail across the heather.
The garbo over there.
It's an empty place, but must be very bleak in winter. We passed through trees with many types of mushrooms and descended through the fields. We reached the little village of laddette. The very dilapidated church looks unused. A couple of common butterflies caught my eye. We would have liked ice creams, but the post office shop was closed. We walked to the church at the bottom of the village for a break. Due to a mix-up, Eileen and I were left behind. The shop had opened in the meantime, and we went for ice cream. The others, thinking we'd gone ahead, left without us. However, we quickly caught up. Soon after, we were on another fine ridge, the start of the Clwydian Hills. It was very pleasant walking on this ridge, even if a bit up and down. Hotel, but it was closed. We were brought to the Druid Inn from miles away. Another fine day as we left the Druid Inn. Time, having been dropped back at Clwyd Gate. We were in sheep country now. This was our first sighting of the mountains of Snowdonia away in the distance. Occasionally we met other Offa's Dyke walkers, but not very often. We had a very steep drop down before rising to Jubilee Tower on Moel Arthur. Our first view of the Irish Sea. At least our little party weren't at loggerheads. These patches of the heather is part of the game bird management system. Jubilee Tower was being erected to commemorate King George III, but he died and it was never completed. The views from the top of Jubilee Tower are quite stunning, with Snowdonia just visible on the horizon.
Whoa! Gotta see you got your all right. Oh, wave your arms.
5 rowdies posing again. Leaving the tower, this wonderful ridge stretches away before us. There are occasional drops, but nothing too great. There are many signs of ancient man's presence here, with hill forts and other works.
imagining you filming Finn and photographing us.
Not to switch it off.
Hang on.
Gentlemen, please, there's a lady present. We sat patiently while Finian set up his camera. Admire Finian's fluid motion.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Job done. After that display, we move on. Snowdonia getting more distinct across the Clwyd plain. This is perhaps a busy friend of Finian's ladybird. Leaving a lovely soft grassy track, we dropped down to Bodfarry and made our way along a narrow lane to a large old farmhouse. It's not easy walking in socks and gravel, a bit of a masochist. There are 2 ponds in the ground and one had a small boat on. Off again, climbing hills, our last day's walking. We crossed the very busy A55 bypass on a very long footbridge. Back into the quiet countryside. It was quite hot now in the sun and we sought shelter under trees and had lunch and a doze. As we neared Prestatyn, the land was tilled and ready for sowing. Over the next hill we got a closer look at the sea and a wind farm. An old mill wheel, many years since this turned. Prestatyn came into view.
So we finished Offa's Dyke.
Not quite. Standing like statues. At long last, the water's edge.
Go the skinny dip and Tony.
Easy where is that, Eileen? Boots off and a paddle for some. I wouldn't get mine on again. So we say farewell to an empty beach, the end of a great walk on Offa's Dyke. We return to Dublin by rail and high-speed ferry from Holyhead.